Did you guys catch that Instagram post I sent the group the other day about this guy, King Picks Media? You see the one about the hybrid athlete?
Yes.
Hybrid.
The hybrid, the double hybrid, the hybrid squared athlete.
It took me a minute. It took me, because there's some real, I was telling Cece, there's some real dumbasses on the internet that would be saying that seriously. So when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this guy.
I love this guy.
He reinvented it.
I love this guy. He is, it's all satire, right? That he puts out. And if you're not from the quote unquote, like tactical shooting community or whatever, you might not get it. And I get that, because a lot of what he does is pretty subtle, but he is awesome. He leaves nobody out. Like if you're in the community or been around it at all, like you've felt personally attacked at least once or twice. But this post, it came up for me because you had mentioned the term hybrid athlete on one of our other episodes.
I think it was that one.
Was that you?
It was
I initially
I had strong feelings on the hybrid athlete.
Yeah, your retort on the hybrid athlete.
I mean, he was killing it.
Full of venom, yeah.
His rationale for what makes him a hybrid athlete. And I think it was Steven like hit me back. He's like, dude, it took me a minute. Like I wasn't sure like if that guy was serious or not.
Yeah, it took me until like the punchline where he's like, I've dedicated my life to this for the last 3 to 4 days. And that was when I was like, oh, okay. Because at first I was like, hybrid? That sounds stupid, dude. Like, what is this about? Where is he going with this? And then eventually I caught on, oh, okay. It was meant to be dumb.
Yeah. God, the part that got me the most was he talking about, he goes, I'm not a very strong lifter. I'm not a very good runner. I'm not a very good shooter. But what makes me elite is that I do all three of these things.
Yeah, he's great. I encourage anybody that's sort of in that space to go follow King Picks Media. The dude's hilarious. He's got a military background and he makes fun of himself constantly. It's great. I think it's what the internet needs more of, and it's what I search for now when I get on, is just looking for something that brings some joy to me, other than the ridiculousness that's going on out there. Dude's awesome. But again, came up because of the hybrid athlete thing that you brought to the table the other day.
That was during the Olympics.
Is that what it was?
We were talking about it during the Olympics, I think.
Yeah. The hybrid athlete? I think we were talking about that during the post-apocalyptic workout. Is being a hybrid athlete superior to surviving the apocalypse?
Which, if you really go back to our discussion, I think the answer was we just all need to be hybrid athletes. I think that's what that's with our training. That's what
he's on to something.
He's ready for the apocalypse.
There's a product in there somewhere.
There's layers of hybridity.
What do you call it if you also can farm, like Steven was saying? Does that make you like a hybrid? I don't know. Yeah, man.
I don't know. It's an asset. That's what that is. Like he's an asset to his community and to his family and to himself. Today's topic is going to be how to build a bigger, stronger back. And I love this topic because I'll just pat myself on the back and say, like, I was always very strong
on your big, wide back.
And I got, I remember just kind of going through my journey, and at different points, like to me, it was just doing my thing, but I'd always get, comments about, man, that's way stronger, or, you got really good back development when I was doing the bodybuilding thing or whatever. But I had a couple questions the other day about, building back strength, and it kind of started from the posture conversation with some guys that are in plate carriers a lot. And that's a whole different ball game, but we're talking about back strength and how to build, a stronger, bigger back, so more muscular back. And so I think there's some context here just in, like, why would you want to do that? What's your goals? What are you doing that for? You're doing that to be more of a overall or well-rounded athlete, not necessarily a hybrid athlete.
You're setting it up, man. Somebody's got to finish it off.
And where does the bigger, stronger back show up for you? Or are you a bodybuilder? And this is you really want to challenge your physique and improve your physique or enhance it in some other way. So I think there's some things there, but I wanted to talk about it today and just kind of go through kind of 4 basic things that I think we can kind of give sort of at a high level that will make sense to people, rather than digging deep into the, like, do this exercise because it's the number one back exercise or whatever else. We'll throw some exercises in there because I think there's some ones that may catch some people off guard, and other people are like, yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I find that to be very true objectively and also experientially, in doing some specific exercises for back development. So anyways, I think when we start with this topic, the first thing is like, how do I build a bigger, stronger back? And people want the exercises. You know, they're like, hey, just tell me what are the 4 exercises I should be doing. But as we do on this show, one of the things we always kind of back it up to is the fundamentals of anything, because I don't think people can hear those enough. And those that probably think they've heard them too much, including myself, are always kind of refreshed when somebody goes back to them and reminds you, you know, it's like, yeah, I should think about that more. And I get those conversations a lot. Like we did a episode the other day on fat loss and maximizing your fat loss. And interestingly, I got a lot of people kind of commenting and hitting me back, or just through the DMs or even my text messages going, man, that was a really good reminder of keeping things in perspective. Yeah. And so anyhow, bringing it back to foundations or fundamentals with building anything from a strength and aesthetics, performance, longevity perspective, I think we got to bring it back to fundamentals. So I'll just throw that out there, and I think everybody's going to agree, but maybe not. And that the first thing you got to do is you got to mind your shoulder mechanics and just know and be better at how to pull better.
Yeah.
So when we look at like mechanics, like I see a lot of exercises being performed, and I never try to make too many assumptions anymore. When I was a new trainer, man, I did that all the time. You look across the gym, you go, that guy's doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. You know, I make an assumption, and I don't do that anymore. I don't know why that person is doing a particular thing in the gym. Some of it looks really stupid to me, but at the same time, like I don't know. I don't know what that person's goals are, what their limitations might be, or you know what their intention is for the day. So I try not to do that. At the same time, I wrestle with that. But again, going back to foundations and fundamentals, what we do see a lot are people that do have very specific intentions and goals, and can be doing a lot better with just the movement in general. Scratch the exercise, or you know, ixnay the exercise, whatever you've chosen. Just moving through better ranges of motion, mechanically getting your shoulders and your body, your arms that are attached to those shoulders, and your thoracic spine, and all that stuff to work for you. So again, without getting too sciencey about it, what do you want to say about rowing or pulling better?
Do you want to start?
I mean, I think, I would get so frustrated with this when I first came a coach, because I didn't really know how to articulate it, you know, especially when you get to this point. Articulate.
Sorry.
What a nerd. No, but when I didn't know how to, you know, communicate it, but a lot of the just general mechanics of how do you actually engage your back, I think a lot of people, especially are newer, who struggle with this, they use a lot of their arms. They'll even try to compensate, use like their shoulders and things like that.
Hands and wrists.
Right. And, you know, I just had a client today. They finished a whole set of pull downs, and they're like, oh, my forearms are so tired. And I don't even think it's from a gripping thing. So I think the mechanics of, we've talked about the complexity of the shoulder, of what it's a very unique, because it's these kind of these two connections that come together. These two different, there's several joints, there's 5 joints, but there's these main joints that work together, where they're almost the base of the joint, the scapula moves with the humerus. So there's a lot more of like mechanics and nuance that needs to go through to get a proper engagement. And so I think a lot of people just don't have, I think it starts a lot with poor body awareness, and more specifically like poor scapular control, which allows you to get good engagement of the back, regardless of the intention of what tissue you're working. So,
right. So whether you're a bodybuilder, you're an athlete, overhead athlete, whatever you're doing, like these basic principles, we don't want to violate. However, there may be times where we get a little bit on the fringes of what we're doing there, depending on our goal. Going back to the physique thing, if you're looking for a very specific isolation of an area or of a muscle group, or particularly like if we're talking about the biggest muscle in the body, which is the lat, or the latissimus dorsi on both sides, there are ways to emphasize certain things. We know this, right? However, when we're looking at, you know, overall building strength and building size, you know, getting lost in the little exercises that do things aren't necessarily a great idea, particularly for somebody that's a beginner or doesn't have the time to put in. So we can talk a little bit more about that later. But I don't know, Cece, what do you want to say about shoulders, or like this? He just mentioned the scaps, and some of the common things that we see or that people struggle with.
You know, first, let's go back to that. But first, when I think about the shoulder, I think about the scapula or the shoulder blade as being your base of support for everything that's happening in the shoulder. So in order for us to have any kind of shoulder movement, so that's, you said humerus, so the long arm of our bone, we have to be able to control our shoulder blade as it moves to also move the humerus as well. So going back to your questions, can you repeat it for me again?
Yeah, I just think like, what are some of the most common things we see people struggling with, and or what their limitations might be when they're trying to build a bigger, stronger back?
So one of the things I think is body awareness. So knowing how to incorporate your back muscles to move your shoulder blades. A lot of times people, like you said, Jones, use their arms. And so even individuals that we've had in here who have an exercise history where they've been, working out for however long, they still have a tendency to pull with their arms first versus initiating a pull with their shoulder blades to then use their arms. So that's one. And then individuals that generally come to us or we see in here and they have some type of shoulder pathology, I would say 85 to 90% of the time, they have a shoulder pathology or a shoulder issue because they aren't using their back correctly.
Yeah.
So they're using more of their arms. So it's a whole mindset shift as well as then a body shift as far as getting people aware of how to use their body in a horizontal pull or
more vertical.
Vertical pull, or even with pushing
Right.
Yeah.
overhead or horizontally.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to come up here in a minute when we sort of talk about some of the exercises we like. But yeah, I think that's so overlooked. I mean, people are looking around the gym for the right piece of equipment or, choosing their 3 exercises, whatever they do for that day, to work, quote unquote, back when they're doing stuff. And I think they lose sight of all the things that are going on back there. I mean, it's a really complex structure. It doesn't have to be complicated, but there's a lot of things going on there. And to your point, I know a lot of people that have shoulder issues anyway because of whether they're lifting correctly or not, right? When I say correctly, just, using good shoulder mechanics, or pulling mechanics, maybe is the more generalized term here. But they're involved in activities that limit or restrict shoulder movement and mechanics anyway, or can exacerbate, maybe an already existing condition. And that could be anything from sitting a lot, driving in the car or whatever, because a lot of people spend a lot of time at a desk. I spend way more time at a desk now in the last 5 years than I have in my previous, 45, 44 years or whatever, as I'm nearing 50. So those things contribute too. So we kind of have to unravel that. We have to kind of look at what our body is doing on a regular basis. And when we do choose movements or exercises to do, like what can we do to kind of overcome that or untangle that sticky web? So again, I think that gets overlooked. Alongside that, people get lost in what I was saying is with the exercise, like going to try to find a machine or a piece of equipment that quote unquote targets the back without thinking about things in a larger perspective. Like what else is the back involved in? When you're not pulling, and you mentioned one, which is pushing, and I want to come back to that, or pressing. So whether it's horizontally out in front of you overhead, like an overhead shoulder press or something like that. But those muscles are always firing whatever you're doing. Whenever you have a load in your hands, your back is working. So keeping that in mind when you're entering into whatever exercise selection or whatever workout you happen to be doing for the day is super important. And I think people lose sight of that. Again, it's like, how much weight am I using? How many reps am I doing? And what is this exercise supposed to be targeting? Is it my lower lat? Is it my middle lat? Is it my upper lat? I think getting lost in the sauce is part of the understanding how your body actually functions. And I think that's a pitfall.
It's funny because your lower, middle, and upper lat, it's your latissimus dorsi. It's not like your upper, middle, or lower trapezius where you actually have different origins and
we're talking about the lat.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other muscles back there. But again, that's what I mean about people getting lost in the sauce. Let's dial this back a little bit. Where are we on our journey? What are we actually trying to get accomplished here?
Yeah. So I think it's just, there's benefit to isolation, whether it's, breaking a movement down into its constituent parts for someone who's maybe a little bit more novice. And then there's isolation if you are a bodybuilder and you want to bring up your rear delts or something like that. Like how do you isolate and focus on specific muscles, and that can change maybe the general guidelines of a pulling movement or a back exercise, depending what you're really targeting.
Right.
But so yes, you need to do some isolation, but for a lot of people, you also need to learn how to integrate. You need to how to integrate a functional or a mechanically robust movement with the shoulder when you're pulling. How do you integrate getting retraction and depending on the positioning and retraction of the shoulder blade, pulling the shoulder down and back as you're also then pulling through the arm, and that where you get good lat engagement, but you don't get compression on the front of the shoulder, which a lot of people get, and that goes a lot into pressing. I think when you're talking about people not using their back in pressing, it's not necessarily that it's the driver, right? Because it's working opposite end of gravity with it. It's not pushing against it, but the positioning really, if you get into that open chest position for a press, it should look like that open chest position of a pull. So that tissue needs to be able to pull the shoulder blades in to open the front of the shoulder to allow a better stretch on the pec, but then also to not compress the front of the shoulder to allow you to get a good healthy press. So a lot of people that get like shoulder impingement or like bicep tendon irritation or like things like that, a lot of that comes when they come down to the bottom of a press and they're not engaging their back or they're pulling their shoulder blades back, and then they get this compression and this pain. So a lot of that, all this stuff is mechanics. What are your mechanics? That's going to get you the biggest back initially, is what are your mechanics in that?
Yeah, again, it just goes back to those foundational principles that we were talking about. And I didn't want that to get left unsaid and get right into the next thing, which is if I'm choosing movements to build strength and size, like hypertrophy, look, the basics and fundamentals work there too. Lift heavy, right? And stimulate, again, heavy is relative, but lift heavy enough to create an adaptation that gets you the result that you're looking for. And again, I think people are looking for like, well, where's the back machine? And there's a lot of great ones out. There's tons of them. I mean, I go into a ton of gyms. I say this all the time. Like one of my favorite gyms on the planet is Santa Cruz Power Fitness. They're actually building a brand new gym up there.
Cool.
Super excited for my friends, Chris and Camille up there, and their entire like family of people and membership up there. They're going to get this great brand new facility. But my point of that is they have an immense amount of equipment, and there's a lot of thought that's gone into how do we choose the right pieces of equipment to impact our membership base and the types of members that come in there in the right kind of way. And that said, the equipment that you're using does matter. However, it's going back to the very foundational, fundamental things of like, let's lift heavy enough to create this stimulus that then creates an adaptation. What are some of the ones that I think people overlook or don't give credit to? I'm gonna give you 3. And I think these are again, very foundational movements. You need to be doing them all the time, but you should be proficient in them, and they should enter into your journey at some point. And if you're not, then I'm going to say you're coming up short if you're trying to build strength and size, particularly in your back. And the first one I'm going to choose is the deadlift. I cannot think of a better way to impact all the muscle in your back at the same time, right? Under an immense amount of tension. Again, that's relative, to build everything and including improving shoulder mechanics.
Yeah.
And that's the deadlift. It's an amazing exercise. And the reasons for that is the huge amount of central nervous stimulation that goes on there, which then the neuromuscular stimulation that comes from that, and placing that bar or dumbbell, whatever. But I'm going to stick with the barbell deadlift, because it's when you fix those hands onto that bar and you retract those shoulder blades into that position where you're like in a neutral spine. And it doesn't always have to be like that. I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying you have to be in a neutral spine every time. There are plenty of times and places where you're not going to be neutral. I'm totally fine with that, as so long as you can control it.
Yeah.
Right. And there's control, stability, and mobility there. That exercise could be my top pick for building a bigger, stronger back. Where do you guys want to weigh in on that?
I mean, I completely agree. Not to pat myself on the back, but I would say deadlifting is probably my strongest lift. Like, I think I'm pretty proficient at it. And that when I've like developed that, and I think I'm also pretty proficient at engaging my back, engaging my lats specifically in a big pull, which has a lot of implications for whether you have a successful deadlift or not. And so when I'm really rigid and I'm doing that and I've pulled some of my heaviest numbers, it's the development that I've got, the pure just strength that I've got is huge. That comes from that for sure. So
Yeah. So, I mean, if we want to pull out the science there, so, I mean, they've done EMG studies where they've looked at different types of lifts and how much of your musculature is engaged. And it comes back to the deadlift. So when you're doing a deadlift, a heavy lift, everything in your body is working. So I'm not surprised that, of course, the deadlift is going to be one of the biggest back builders.
For sure.
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, the guys with the biggest deadlifts are also going to have the biggest backs.
Yeah.
It's just, it's that equates at the end of the day.
And the thing is that you don't have to do a heavy deadlift because it's all the time to get a big back, but it's all the work that comes up to the point of being able to do that heavy deadlift.
To have the capacity, to have the capacity in your back to be able to perform a heavy deadlift already takes prerequisites. Like there's a reason that we've talked about we don't start someone on a barbell deadlift from the floor day one if they're super novice. But as the back, it's a kind of an ultimate integration of like the total strength and stability and ability to stabilize of your back into a movement. You're applying it into that movement. So
I love what you said, that like the ultimate integration. So if you're looking for like efficiency, right, and trying to save time and get the most bang for your buck, get those deadlifts in, right? And particularly the barbell deadlift. It's an awesome one. And I've been public and I've said, like, I think it's an overrated lift for a lot of reasons. Not for this.
Yeah.
Not for this. The next one I'm gonna throw out there is the barbell back squat. And again, that might surprise people too, but for the exact same reasons. And you mentioned kind of going through like being able to open up your chest, to engage all that back musculature to be able to support that bar and support your structure, going down to the bottom of that squat and back up. Man, again, going back to EMGs and things like that, what's going to create the greatest stimulus and where you're going to get your most bang for your buck? Barbell back squats all day long for a lot of reasons. However, it can be problematic for people. And we see a lot of things happening in the barbell back squat where people are trying to get around maybe a weak back.
Yeah.
It's not helpful. What do you want to say about that?
Well, is getting around a weak back, but also then posturally, as far as what's happening thoracically or in their shoulder joint, are they able to open up their chest and get into a more, I guess, with the shoulders, you know what I'm talking about?
Like a stacked, stable position with the shoulders. Yeah.
Like the rest of the body.
Yeah. I mean, even just to build a good shelf for the barbell, even to just be able to create the mobility and the tension to put, when you have a heavy barbell on your back, you don't want to put that thing on your neck, which a lot of people do, right? How do you build that shelf with the scaps? But it's interesting. We have a client that Cece and I share, who she's been lifting for a long time, but I feel like we've been really pushing her. She's on a very specific program over the past couple months. And she kept saying to me like, man, I've been really working on like making these exercises like squats more of like a full body exercise. Right. And the fatigue she's gotten and the soreness and things like her back, not in a bad way, not like her low back's killing her kind of thing, but from an only leg day, a lower body day, right? And she's just getting this heavy stimulus from it because she's actually, after all these years, it's finally clicking of like, how do I engage and apply this to where I can do these movements more effectively? So.
Yeah, I think that it's often overlooked in terms of the benefits it can bring to building back musculature. I love what you said there about building that shelf. When you're starting out with in your fitness journey or with barbell back squats, and you throw that thing up there, one of the first things that happens is you recognize how uncomfortable that bar can be.
I need a pad on my
I need a pad. I need a pad.
I need a pee pad.
No.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the first indication that you need to build a bigger, stronger back if you need a pad back there. Sitting on basically those bones, those scapula, if they don't have a bunch of muscle on top of them, can be super uncomfortable. So again, if that's what you're feeling, maybe you need to do a little bit more back work.
Yeah.
You mentioned one earlier, and I said we'd come back to it. And I think probably the most overlooked, but also beneficial exercise for building a bigger back is the barbell bench press.
Yeah.
That's for my chest.
Yes, exactly. And you maybe just kind of go back through that, like kind of articulate what's going on there and why it is such an effective back building exercise when applied properly.
So, I mean, it's the cornerstone of your stability for this tabletop or this foundation to press off of. So if you're on a weak, soft surface and you're trying to push off that, you're trying to generate force, there's all this wasted energy, right? But when you generate all this tension into your back, all the way from your low back, all the way, and depending on your arch and all those different things, we talk mechanics, and being able to engage, we've talked about how mobile the shoulder girdle is to be able to stabilize, to couple the force, to actually press effectively, let alone not with injury and not with pain, you need so much engagement. I was benching today and I've been trying to push my numbers a little bit, and I finished my last set and I really pushed close to failure. And in that set, my whole back lit up just from trying to stabilize and grind out that last rep. So it's a huge thing. Yes, it's not going through a range of motion, but you need that engagement to have a big press.
Yeah, I think one of the things to think about here is like, again, while there is this obviously a strong relationship between size and strength.
Yeah.
You show me the strongest bench pressers in the world, and I will show you the dudes with the biggest backs, or females with the
5
biggest
feet
backs.
wide.
Yeah, they're fire hydrants, right, with arms attached to them at the end of the day. And so again, I think people are searching for exercises and how do I build these things, but that's one of them. And something to think about here, and what you just brought up there is on a low, quote unquote, lower body day, you are engaging your back on all of those lifts. So again, like if it's a chest day, still engaging your back, right? With a leg day, whether it's deadlifting or it's squatting, still engaging your back a ton. And so you could think about that when you are thinking later and down the line in your workouts for the week or the month or whatever, in terms of how much volume and what exercises you are choosing to get better back development. We can talk a little bit about that later, and just again, how to maximize that. But that back is being hit. You know, if you're doing a typical, when I say that, I guess I got to be careful with that. But if you're kind of on that 5-day-a-week split type routine where, you know, it's an upper lower type thing throughout the week, and you throw in your accessories in there, think about how much volume of work your back gets. And if you're adding in the deadlift, the squat, and the back squat, and the bench press, like your back's getting taxed, all of that, you know, through all of those days and movements as well. So I think that's important to understand. Now, again, going back to the size and strength thing, I didn't say the guys with the biggest chests have the biggest backs. So the guys with the strongest bench presses have the biggest backs. There's a major difference there, because when you just sort of tiptoe over into the physique world, you'll find some individuals, some really, really good chest development. And that doesn't necessarily mean they have good back development. And, you know, I've said this before, but at some point along the way, people forgot how to lift weights. And we're seeing a resurgence of people lifting the heavier weights. Obviously, powerlifting is still big and it will continue to be big, but we saw people moving out into all these isolated movements, slow controlled movements to really accentuate a specific muscle group on a specific day, going back to that bodybuilder split type of stuff. And then the weight or the loading that they were using and continue to use is not very high. Again, you can get hypertrophy with by using a submaximal weight. You can get that. We know that. It's going to be time under tension at the end of the day. But we're talking about strength, bigger, stronger back. Talking about strength, you have got to overload that thing. And while tempo is always going to be important in anything we're doing, as we go back to our foundations and fundamentals and things like that, the important thing to understand here is the overload that's happening. And so while you can overload reps, right, and that time under tension, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to build maximal strength at the same time. So again, it's going back to the top of the talk. If we're talking bigger, stronger back, that's an important thing to realize here. So again, if you're in that physique world and you're struggling because you've got a discrepancy, you know, in terms of, size from front to back or left to right, you know, width or whatever else, think about that. You know, what are you doing there, and how can you maybe throttle up, you know, the amount of work your back is getting? If you're that guy with the big chest and no back, you running around with invisible lat syndrome, fire pits, you know, ILS, however you want to say it, you know, everybody knows that guy. Where's that coming from? Here's the other thing I will say: from that front to back thickness, right? You see guys with nice big wings, you know, or lat spread, right? That V taper look that people like. I'm always more impressed, not by the width, but by the thickness they have from front to back. And again, I'll just go back. You show me the guys with the strongest bench presses, I'll show you the guys with the most thickness as well, because it 100% translates. Go ahead.
Sorry, which that comes back to, you know, mechanics of what you're actually working with, right? So if you actually need to be able to retract the shoulder blades to work that back thickness, if you actually don't have good mechanics, you're not going to get that. So,
right. So I guess going back to exercises. So then we got to get to like, okay, so when you are actually picking exercises, what are the things that you can be doing? If we sans the bench, squat, and deadlift here, and we just move on to some other stuff. Man, there's so many things that you can do, right? But again, it's about the stimulus, it's about the overload, and doing it, with proper mechanics. So it's going to give you the best result. So we're starting to pick exercises, things to think about. There are, you can be doing like bilateral type movements. You can be doing isolateral type movements, single arm or two arms at a time. You can be fixed to a bar. You can be, you can have things like dumbbells, cables, all this other stuff. It can be tough to choose. And again, how do you choose the right one? We talked about this on a previous podcast about how you pick exercises, or more specifically, what does that movement actually look like in a vacuum? Like, are you picking the same exercise or the same movement pattern, if you will, just back to back? An example would be like, okay, so I'm doing a seated supported machine row. Yeah. Where I've got that chest pad in front of me and I'm pulling through it. And then I immediately go to that single arm standing cable row. Yeah. Or dumbbell row. It's effectively the same movement pattern. Hands are in the same position. Your shoulders in the same position. You're affecting the muscles the same way. So essentially, instead of getting your 3 sets of this and your 3 sets of that, you've got 6 sets of basically the same thing. Yeah. Are you getting the maximal result there?
No, I just had this conversation with my girlfriend's son is 15 years old and he's just starting to lift. And I haven't had a chance to really get in the gym with him, but he came back from the gym, the local 24, and I asked him what he did. He said back. I was like, well, what did you do specifically? Yeah. And he basically just told me like 4 different types of rows. And I was like, well, you maybe got a little overlap there, but from a very beginner standpoint, that's exactly what he's doing. He's going to the back machine. He's doing a single arm dumbbell row. Then he's doing some type of cable row. I'm like, you just did kind of the same thing multiple times, but that's, he's like, back stuff. That's what I did.
Exactly. Yeah. And we see that.
Picked exercises.
Exactly. Right? And so I think modalities do change the stimulus. So there is like a very small stimulus there, but really what we look at as coaches is what's the movement pattern and what's the intention with that. So really, instead of looking more at different modalities, pick a different position of your structure, where your elbows are coming from, where you're pulling from. Are you pulling from overhead to down? Are you pulling at a 45-degree angle? Are your elbows flared out to the side? Are you in a supinated grip? Things like that.
Narrow grip.
Are you in a narrow grip? Or the typical where you're just talking about elbows in, kind of more lat-focused exercise. Think more of those things. And that goes for the bodybuilder who's trying to isolate and bring 100%. Up specific areas. So
they're the best at it, actually. They pick all kinds of different stuff.
Exactly. Right? So if you're that's your intention to build up specific areas, yes, you need to know how to, I've talked with people about this of like, if you're only doing exercises that are very lat based, you're probably going to leave out some rear delt development at the end of the day, right? Because you need to slack that lat and focus on the rear delt, which is a different mechanic for a lot of people. But picking those different things, and then even if you want a stronger back, like yes, we've talked about just the foundational mechanics is how do you pull, but there is still how do you work different areas to get a full, robust, strong back, and that can look different depending on that. So.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing is like when you're picking exercises, am I getting that variety? Variety is important, but too much variety can be
confusing.
Confusing. I don't like that word because
overkill.
It's redundant.
Redundant. Yeah.
That was the word I used.
Yeah,
it's redundant.
It's redundant. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah. in my talk with the young lad.
Yeah. Your words.
And he's like, "What's redundant mean?" I was like, "You did the same thing multiple times." But anyway,
there you go.
So in terms of like eliminating the redundancy, and again, consistency is different than redundancy. Mm-hmm. So picking 1 or 2, 3 exercises, whatever you're doing in your weekly, routine or whatever, and sticking to those for a while and getting really good at that and seeing progression is important. So what's being effective for you and what isn't. Also, the other part of that is again, that variety can help steer you away from getting through like repetitive movement patterns and not getting maximum benefit other places. So we're not saying you have to have a bunch, but at the same time, we're also saying have a couple that you stick to and try those for a while. Mm-hmm. And so we see a lot of people, some of the, the ones that I see out there that people choose are what they see, obviously like a bodybuilder who has a big back doing, again, sans the deadlift, squat, and bench press. They're seeing some very specific things. So I want to caution people on a few exercises as well as maybe give them some insight to maybe how, if they're doing that stuff, how to make it a little bit better. One of the ones that comes up for me a lot is I see this very isolated 45-degree single arm cable pull. Like
Yeah.
it's a pull down, right? So you're sort of in a neutral position with your hand in your arm, right? And you're pulling that thing down, and there's some internal rotation going on at the shoulder
And some elevation.
And the goal there with that exercise is to, as best you can, isolate the lat. Now, again, the term isolation can get a little bit, gray here because obviously you have to use the muscles in the arm and in the shoulder in order to make that stuff happen. You just went through that. And we were talking about that with the foundational movement patterns. However, when you're doing that, obviously, yes, you are going to isolate the lat more than you would say in a different movement pattern without getting into all of them. I caution people with that because yes, you can do that, but that is problematic for a few different reasons. We should cover that.
I mean, I think about, for me, I think one is, are you overdoing the volume on that to where the lat is already really powerful and strong? We've already just went over all these exercises that the lat is involved in. It's like, yes, there's maybe some merit to isolating the lat, but that tissue is already going to be firing in a normal row when you have normal joint mechanics and let's say a healthier joint mechanic. So if you're getting pigeonholed to, if that's your primary row, one, can you row in a more functional or healthy joint mechanic where you are getting good shoulder movement throughout the row? Can you do that? And then if you are doing isolation, like if you really want that movement feels really good for you, are you balancing that out with enough volume on the other musculature that we've talked about that needs to be worked on, the traps, the rhomboids, the rear delts, things like that? Are you balancing that volume in addition to that? Because that's where a lot of people, it's this, it's an internal rotator, it's pulling into that position, you get some elevation, so is pushing. So a lot of people will do all these chest exercises and then all these lat exercises and nothing into external rotation, nothing into retraction, these things. That's where a lot of those shoulder issues tend to come up, especially these chronic shoulder issues. So
yeah, I have to say is that if you're doing that single arm isolated lat pull, why are you doing it? Because I think more people need to really do a horizontal pull, whether you're doing it with a neutral grip where your palms are facing your midline, or if you're doing it with your palms facing down, or even your palms facing up. But pulling horizontally where you're getting more middle trap engagement and rhomboid engagement. Yeah. Yes, lats are going to give you a big back. They're going to give you the wing spread. But I think most people could benefit more from a bilateral lat pull for a bigger...
Horizontal lat pull, right?
Horizontal.
Bilateral, horizontal lat pull.
Yeah. Or if they want to work the lats, bilateral versus a single arm.
I agree.
Because of mechanically, people then start to lose the mechanics because they start to overload it, but yet they don't have the proper mechanics to hold their shoulder and shoulder blade in position when they're doing that.
Yeah, one of my favorite exercises here. So if we got agreeance at all from anybody listening to this on the bench press piece, right? My favorite back exercise, always, all time, is going to be that seated, chest supported, horizontal lat pull. Right. Or row. Sorry. Yeah. And there's several pieces of equipment you can do that on. Everybody makes one of those, but I always really loved the hammer strength machine or the plate loaded machine. Yeah. There was another company that made one. I think it was, and I hated this company for a lot of reasons, but I did really like this machine. It was called a Techno Gym. And I think they're still around. I don't know. We don't have a lot of that equipment in our gym, fixed equipment like that, but I hadn't seen one. There was one gym that we worked out at for quite some time that had one of these in there. But it's that one where you're sitting down, you can adjust the seat up or down to adjust for height, right? So that'll adjust obviously where that bar path is or the machine path is. But you could just load the shit out of that thing, and it's the opposite of the bench press. Yeah. So if you're thinking about like, hey, how can I really overload, my back the same way I would be overloading my chest? Well, doing like a bent over barbell row, there's obviously limitation there because my lower back, my posture, everything has to kind of work together and in conjunction to really hit those muscles in my back versus sitting on that thing where I can sit tight on that machine. I can push my torso up against it so it's in the front of me, and I can reach out and I can get a full range of motion in the pull, right? As well as the protraction and letting it come way forward, even to where I can go into some flexion, right? Without risking injury or problems with my lower back and going into too much flexion, and those muscles just don't have to work as hard. So they're working, but they're not working like they would be working, say, like in a bent over row. The other thing is like, unless you're doing like you look like you're literally rowing a rowboat, the mechanics there are very, very controlled. You can control them just like a bench press. That bar's only going to come down and up in one direction. It's the same with that big seated row. Horizontal row is sitting down. It's only going to move in one direction. So risk of injury with the loads that you're using tend to be a lot less. Yep. In fact, I've hurt myself plenty of times doing a bench press. I've never, ever gotten off. So I've gotten off the bench press a million times and done the old grab the shoulder, turn the arm around a few times in the air, right? Right? Whatever's like, something's up, right? Never felt that on one of those machines before or on that particular exercise. I really like that one for the overload, the support, and the quote unquote isolation or focus, I think is more of the term for the entire back. So it really allows you to go through those shoulder mechanics of depression and retraction. And again, getting that bar or your hands or, as you start to move up into the arm and into the shoulders to get that thing through a full range of motion, again, just like your bench press. Now, I would say this, here's a couple of tips, like females, that might not be the most comfortable position for you because your boobs are just getting smashed into that thing.
Yeah, and then also for the height as well. So usually when I use one of those machines, I have to stand.
Yep.
And actually, I get a lot of full body recruitment because I'm able to get my legs involved as well and create a lot of tension through my glutes and my legs. And then that pad for the chest, I'm able to get my boobs around it or over it.
Shelf for it.
Yeah. So I'm bringing that up because there are not all equipment is created equal. It's not built the same for everybody. And so if your structure makes that piece of equipment a little uncomfortable and it doesn't feel right, here's some things. One is what you just said. You can stand in front of it. Like oftentimes you can drop that seat all the way to the bottom so you can straddle it. Mm-hmm. And so you're more in a power type position or like in a squatted type position if you're a little tall for the pad. But that's one way to do it. If you're a little short, right, you can also get like a booster, like a yoga block or some RX mats, like Steven's sitting on right now. His little booster seat in the chair next to us or whatever. You can stack.
I'm kind of tall, kind of.
You can stack those things up to kind of get the right height for you if that seat doesn't adjust for you well. So that's another thing that you can do. And in terms of the other thing that I really like about that machine is you can do that isolateral as well with the same. So it's like a single arm dumbbell bench press. You can do it single arm. And that would allow you maybe a little bit more thoracic rotation, right? Maybe a little bit more protraction on the one side. And you could then use that other arm to help stabilize against that pad. You can wrap it around the back side of that thing, hold on tight, right? So it's creating even more stability, allowing you to create more tension in the muscles that you're trying to work. So, and a lot of those things is that there'll be several kind of hand positions. Some of them even have one that rotates.
That's nice.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff you can do, but they'll have like different hands, so you can go more neutral, maybe more at a 45, or more in a pronated grip. A little tougher to do those on the supinated. I have never found one where you could go like an underhand grip and feel really comfortable. I never had that kind of range of motion. And I think that would feel pretty uncomfortable as you're outstretched in front of you. But my point of that being is it is versatile. And again, thinking about standing and what you can get involved there with even more rotation and a little bit more reach. So again, the front rotation and kind of that rotating back action that you can get on, it's a super cool exercise. So I don't want to beat that one up. It's just my favorite. So I want to get on the soapbox there. What else do you guys like?
As far as an exercise, like
strength and size.
I mean, I don't know if this is kind of stealing the same thing, but I love anything where it's chest supported. So like I like an incline chest supported dumbbell row.
Oh, yeah, those are great.
I think that gives you kind of the same thing. Where you're getting that lots of stability and you can really just focus on that output. I love that. But then I guess if I do like anything where you can get, we've talked about isolation, but I like to start to integrate where something where it's like more of like a standing dumbbell row where one, like I call it like a 3-point row, a tripod row, one hand's supported on a bench or a rack or whatever. And you can get a little bit more of that mechanic that's a little bit more natural mechanic of maybe a little bit of rotation, a little bit more protraction, a little bit more movement at the shoulder blade. And even if you're keeping the elbow in, like that's a huge back builder if you're rowing with proper mechanics of all the musculature we're working versus just isolating something and always focusing on that. So I like that a lot.
Yeah, so that's a lot of horizontal pull stuff. Let's talk vertical pulls.
I was going to say, so as far as vertical pulls, I have two of my favorites. One, obviously weighted pull-ups. And then the other one is
Queen of weighted pull-ups.
It's the queen.
is lat pull downs. So, varying the grip, whether it's a pronated grip where your palms are facing away, or if it's a supinated grip and your palms are facing you, or even a neutral grip as far as where your palms are facing one another towards your midline. I really like the lat pull down machine, or any type of vertical pull down machine where you can lock your legs in, because Jones and I, we were on the floor the other day. And he's like, hey, I think I had maxed out one of the cable machines.
Maxed out the machine, yeah.
And he's like,
Full
here,
stacking.
you should go over to this other cable pull down and try this. But the thing is when I tried his suggestion, the load was so heavy, I couldn't keep my body down.
Yeah,
so in order to be able to pull a certain load, I have to have my legs locked in. So for the overload principle, I really like the lat pull down where your legs are locked in.
Yeah. So cautions on the lat pull down are some obvious ones. I mean, you'll see the person over there that's doing the whole flailing thing, where they're basically, deadlifting it, but they're doing it from the seated position. They're flailing their body back and forth. Obviously, while there could be some value there in building strength and power, if your goal is to build a bigger, stronger back, there's a lot of other exercises you could be doing that would include where you could add that momentum in and that additional body movement. Like, that's not one I would choose. I'd go to something like a clean, or a snatch, and really create power and strength there. If that's really what you're going to do. So if you're basically doing a seated snatch or power clean, stop it. Yeah. Right. Use that machine for what it's intended for. And that is, like you said, create stability by locking your legs in there and take that lower body out of it to a certain extent. Obviously, it has to maintain tension, and then work the different hand positions.
Yeah.
And I
feel a lot different depending on that.
Yeah. And in terms of, like, let's go back to the lat for a second and building a bigger back, stronger back, but also just improving your body's ability to pull, period. One of the things I think people overlook a lot is they're constantly doing that exercise pronated.
Yeah.
And you may have even covered this at one point, Ryan, on another show, and doing that with an underhand grip. So it's more like a chin up versus a pull up. If you were thinking, we'll hit that pull up here in a second, and pulling with that underhand or supinated grip, man, you want some lat engagement.
Yeah.
That's a great way to do it. It adds a little bit of extra length to the lat based on the position of the humerus or that long bone in the upper arm. And you can get a little bit more activity there for sure.
I introduce that to people, a supinated grip, more than I introduce a pronated grip. Like if someone's still working on their mechanics, because it's a little bit more natural mechanic at that in that contracted position. We've talked about, like, it opens up the subacromial space a little bit. It's a little bit, feels better on the shoulder. And then if you're wanting to work on your mobility, like you said, everyone's obsessed with length and stretch and all that. You get a deeper stretch in the lat when you're maintaining that supination in the reach. So I love it. I teach that to people before I do a pronated, because there's a little bit more control and awareness that comes with a pronated pull down.
I would agree. So I think, doing a palm up grip, a supinated grip, is a lot easier for people to maintain position in their shoulder blades when they're pulling. And the other thing is, when you're taking a palm up grip, your humerus or your upper arm bone, as far as where it goes into your shoulder, you're more externally rotated. So it's creating more space in the shoulder. Mm-hmm. So when you are overhead, there's not as much, quote unquote, impingement or compression.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, specifically for people that know they have that, or have a constant bicep tendon irritation, or even a tendonitis or osis, if after whatever they're doing. And my BJJ people, right? If you're going to do pull downs, I'd highly encourage you to do them underhand. You guys are already elevated and internally rotated. You look like grapplers, right? You probably already have a big back because you're constantly pulling, right? You're in that guard or pulling people in tight. So that's I think something that people could move over to and probably get a lot more out of. Now, you just mentioned the mobility piece and increasing that length of that tissue. Agreed or disagreed? Most people have tight lats.
Agree.
Right? Agree.
Agreed.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So when you see that forward shoulder elevated kind of rotation, internal rotation thing, again, going back to building bigger, stronger backs, and I mentioned limitations in terms of people getting into the barbell back squat and things like that. That could be largely due to a lack of mobility or tissue length in the lat, right? Or an overactivity in the front too. We could talk about that. I'm not going to go there. The point of this is if we talked about this in our mobility episode, want more mobility in your shoulders, maybe try a supinated grip, pull down a little bit more to try to get a little bit more range through that movement pattern, but also get a little bit more length in that tissue and strengthen what's likely a little bit of a weaker section of that entire muscle complex.
I was going to say, here's another one too. So if you're talking about mobility and taking the upper handed or the palm up kind of a grip, the supinated grip, your biceps inserts into your ulna, which is the long bone or the elbow bone of your forearm. And so most people walk around and they're internally rotated at the shoulders and at their forearms. Yep. Whereas if you take it up kind of a grip, you're going to be helping to work on some of that mobility because of your being externally rotated. And so many people are tight in the forearms. To get in this position will also help.
For sure. Again, going back to my grapplers, a good way for you to maybe overcome some of that. So you're killing two birds with one stone. We're increasing some mobility or range of motion below the shoulder as well as at the shoulder through that supinated grip. I want to move to the pull-up because I think like I see people doing pull-ups and I see people doing a lot of pull-ups. And I think it's great. Pull-ups are an awesome exercise. I think everybody should be able to do a pull-up. I think everybody should have pull-ups. When I say that, I said the goal would be to have everybody have pull-ups in their program. People don't, that's not the case, particularly females, because they don't have the strength, right, to get there. However, they can go over to the pull-down machine and load it up with near body weight and somehow figure out a way to get that bar all the way down to their chest. And so going back to pull-ups, not just pull-ups, but weighted pull-ups, loaded pull-ups. And when I say everybody should, get bands, get some assistance, right? Start working through that where you are pulling your body weight through space. You want to build a big back? Again, like look at the guys that go through like basic training or through like a selection process, like in the military or in law enforcement or in the fire service or something like that, and how many pull-ups. Look at the back development they get in the time that they spend there. Why? It's not because they're doing squats and deadlifts and bench presses, because they're doing a lot of pull-ups. It's an effective movement. Also, I think it's a good skill and a good thing to have in life to be able to pull your body weight through space.
Yeah, I mean, if you're hanging off a cliff, you want to get up.
Right.
But I think probably the biggest tip I can give for pull-ups, I work a lot with people, is, and I think that's where a pull down, because it provides the stability for you, it kind of takes away this need.
100%.
I think with a pull-up, we've talked about like full body engagement. You need to be able to co-contract to be able to, you don't get an outside force to provide stability for you. So a lot of people, they're very relaxed in their body and they're just trying to pull with their back
and their arms.
Their arm ends up being their arms.
Their wrists and hands.
Exactly. Versus being really, really rigid, like all the way from your quads to your glutes to the core to the back to everything being co-contracted. And that allows you to really produce that force in that pattern that you want. So if you really, really struggle with pull-ups, really think like, are you engaging your full body when you're doing a pull-up, not just trying to pull yourself up?
Yeah. I mean, it's no secret around here. It's like Cece's favorite exercise ever. And so when people are like, it's always impressive to me when somebody can get up on the bar and do 20 pull-ups. Like that's impressive. That is an expression, right, of your strength, right, for sure.
Yeah.
However, think about your pull-up the same way you think about any other exercise. Again, go back to your bench press. I don't see people getting on the bench press and doing sets of 20.
Yeah.
I see them doing sets of like 8 to 12, maybe even less if they're really working on their strength. Think about your pull-up the same way. If you can get up there and do 20 pull-ups on the bar, think about doing 8 to 12 pull-ups with some additional weight, with some additional loading, and watch your back development and your strength go through the roof. Now, going back to, this is the cautionary piece with pull-ups, and that is, if your mechanics suck, or if you are loaded to the extent where you cannot perform that movement pattern, right, with good mechanics, also watch your shoulder issues go through the roof.
Yeah.
And I think that's a thing that people really struggle with. So if you already have them, maybe you already have them being shoulder issues. Maybe you start with the pull down. Maybe you start with some of these other back movements that we were talking about and really work through those mechanics to try to open up, create more space in the shoulder, create a better balance between the front and the back with that overhead pulling movements, or with those overhead pulling movements, so that you can do it properly and don't be loading it and we're talking real pull-ups here. I'm talking strict pull-ups.
Yeah.
I'm not talking these butterfly floppy pull-up things. I'm talking a strict pull-up from a dead hang, right, all the way up to chin over the bar, right? So you're working through a full range of motion. The same way it would look is if you're doing a pull down on a pull down machine where you're pulling that chest all the way to your bar, or that bar all the way to your chest.
Well, I think that kind of ties into it. It's a good cautionary for, we've talked about things like the barbell deadlift and the barbell squat and things like that. And the pull-ups, another more specific to that. But, when people, a lot of times they say like they have an injury or something like that maybe they can't do something like a squat or a deadlift. Like that's where really working on some of this isolation stuff, working on this capacity, even just holding a 45-pound bar on your back for a back squat, like that takes a lot of strength and awareness and proprioception in your body. So if you are someone who like every time you try to deadlift that you just get pain or it just doesn't feel good, maybe you need to work on your total back strength and musculature before you even get to that point. So that could be, a kind of cautionary thing as well for those.
Yeah. So I was talking about the person that should be doing pull-ups that isn't because they're not weak, they're not strong enough to do them. Doesn't mean don't do them. It means take some load off of that, get a band, do some band. The bands are awesome. Those super bands you have, put them around your knee, put them around your foot, whatever. I like the foot better than the knee for a lot of reasons. We've covered that before actually, but get it on there and work through the motion. Maybe that is an auxiliary movement that you do later in your workout for the day. Yeah. Or maybe it's a skill that you're practicing right at the beginning. It's kind of part of your warm up, however you're doing it, but get your pull-ups done. Stephen brought up something, we were kind of talking about this offline that I think is important too. So we've talked about building a bigger, stronger back, but you had something that you brought up that we should probably cover too.
That was just, what if I have limitations? I think it was primarily in regard to the barbell back squat, the deadlift, the bench press. What if those movements, are painful for me, or I'm not ready to, I don't have the capacity for those movements. Yeah, I have back issues in general.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'm sure most people listening to this can relate in some way. I certainly can, and first off is understanding where your limitations are, right? Where are they, and then more specifically understanding what is the actual limitation, right? Is this a mobility thing? Is it a flexibility thing? Is this an orthopedic thing? Is this a musculature thing? Is it a strength thing? Or is it movement mechanics thing? Yeah. So those are all reasons you might feel pain. Pain is a signal, right? It's an alert that something isn't right, right? And those are all those things you should be sort of inspecting, if you will, or assessing. And you don't have to be a physiotherapist or an athletic trainer or a chiropractor or an orthopedic surgeon to understand the basic level. This is not something you need to do a huge deep dive on. We talk about this stuff all the time. However, what do you do like with regard to bench pressing, squatting, deadlifting? We take it back to the top and do that stuff. What are some suggestions?
I think there's one loading. It may not be that specific. It's not that you shouldn't do that movement pattern. That just might be too intense. That might take too much strength initially. So we've talked a lot about like doing a goblet squat, doing these, which will still develop if you're really deconditioned. A goblet squat will develop trunk stability and trunk strength, back strength, things like that. So what are the a regressed movement pattern or modality that you can do that's getting that same benefit? And then I think back to the isolation, like breaking it into its constituent parts. You might need to work on strength and stability, and you might need to do some low back exercises before you can have the capacity to do the heavy back squat or barbell deadlift, things like that. Like a reverse hyper, if that's a good exercise for you, that there's some nuance there. But if that's a good exercise for you, can you engage your lats? Like all these other things that are really important that are kind of these prerequisites before you get to graduate to that level.
Yeah, it's going back to the foundationals too. So, it's, you talked about regressing the exercises, but not just regressing it, but then also adding in your tempos where you're owning the position and, through the concentric, the pause, and the eccentric movement patterns. So what?
I wanted to say this earlier about tempos. One of the reasons we love tempos is there's time under tension, but one of the reasons that we love it, especially for the newbie, is you can't cheat. Yeah. It forces you into good mechanics, and you're able to adjust the mechanics throughout the movement too. So I just wanted to add that really quick. So
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think you're ever too far along in your journey or too early in your journey to be visiting those foundational things. Yep. And so it will always come back to fundamentals. The best athletes will always, basically what you're going to see is that elite athlete performs the foundational things at an elite level, right? They perform those things consistently at an elite level. They can almost do it automatically. They don't have to think about it, but it takes a lot of work to get there to be able to do that. And it's never a bad thing to, when you're in the end of a training cycle, go all the way back to the beginning again to just revisit, and recheck in with what do those foundational movement patterns look like, especially after going through a muscle building and strength building routine for a period of time. So let's say you're in some type of a 10 to 12 week block or something like that. At the end, likely things have come up, right? You've overloaded the body. Things have been overstressed. Things may be overcompensating a little bit. You may be feeling a little pain, a little discomfort in areas, a little limited range of motion here or there, because you've been focused more on the loading and the strength, or the strength pieces, which are going to incorporate, generally speaking, more loading and more intensity. You've been dialing all of these things in, right, with rest times and recovery and all the things that go into that. I don't think it's ever a bad idea to go all the way back to the beginning and just spend some time there. You're not going to lose strength, right, in a couple of weeks of spending time revisiting basic movement patterns, maybe focusing on the mobility, maybe decreasing the weight by half, right, and really working through a full range of motion and all the things we've talked about, right, and really, so because the intensity is lower, that leaves you more cognitive bandwidth to kind of focus on what's going on. It's also a great time to check in and have somebody else watch you. Take some video, or or get a coach, or have one of your buddies watch you and go and tell you what they're seeing. Because when they're doing that, when you're under max loads at the sort of the end of your training block, are you hearing any of that? No, I don't give a shit about any of that. It's like, did I get the weight, off the rack and, my ass to grass and back up for however many sets I needed to get, or that bench press to my or to my chest and back up and get it re-racked? And did I hit my metrics or my goals for the day? Those are things that get lost. Everybody goes through that, right? Everybody goes through that. So again, wherever you are in your journey, these things apply from top to bottom.
So what you're saying is, if you want to be the ultimate hybrid athlete, you need to go back to the foundation.
Yeah. I don't know what that means. I think it's funny, but yes, your ultimate hybrid athletes are going to be the guys that execute the fundamentals really, really well. So here's my plug on that. No matter where you are in your journey, when you look at some of our programming and what we provide people, if you're coming in with a coach and you're working one-on-one with somebody, dude, we're hitting that stuff right from the get-go. We're not gonna go out there and try to overload you with a bunch of stuff you suck at, right? So we're gonna help you get really good at the things that you can get really good at. We're gonna improve even the things that you are good at, and maybe being a little bit better. We may even do a little less of that so that we can catch these other things up. Think about that. Like, where could I be spending less time in certain areas and more time here to get that development I'm looking for, get that strength, get that range of motion, get those mechanics dialed in? So that's something to think about. But when look at our programs like Red Dot Strong and Red Dot Fitness Max. Both of those programs are 12-week programs, and both of those programs start with a 4-week block of just revisiting these foundational movement patterns and taking you through and with the intention of taking you through and making sure you're set up for success through the next 3 months of programming, right? So again, if you're competing in a meet, right, of some kind, like whether it's powerlifting or you're going through your bodybuilding, competition or physique competition or whatever else, when you're at the end, when you're at that peak, like, dial it back. Like, people think, oh yeah, I deload. I kind of come out of that with the deload. Yeah, well, in that deload, these are the things you should be focusing on. A lot of people just focus on, like, just get me through the deload so I can get back to the heavy weights or whatever. But again, if you enter into our program, no matter where you enter into it, you can go back to the beginning and start. When you're done with that 12 weeks, you can go all the way back to the beginning, restart, and your strength, your power, your hypertrophy should all be better because of it. This is the cycle. Yeah. This is what's happening. I'll be honest, like, when I watched Ryan is a really good example, specifically with like those heavier lifts we talked about. The most development like that I saw you have was when you ran strong like 2 or 3 times back to back. Yeah. Just, we're going to cycle back through here. We're not changing everything. What we're doing is we're getting better as we go. So I think maybe the overall takeaway from here is like, we start at the top. It's do a better job with your practice, right? Of the mechanics that you're using when you're trying to build a bigger, stronger back. Secondly, choose the exercises that don't first come to mind to really focus on to really overload, and that being your squat, bench press, and deadlift. Again, if those are problematic for you, there are all alternatives and there's sort of workarounds. But if you can't do those well, you should be asking yourself, why? How do I get better at these things? Because every human body should be able to do that within reason, right? Again, you may have limitations, right? If you're an amputee and the barbell back squat is not the right movement for you, there are other things that you can do. I get that. Like, we have those people here. Like, literally.
Yeah.
So, and they're strong as piss, right? And they've had lots of strength and muscular development all over their bodies. So there's ways around this. Next thing, if you're choosing some of these isolated exercises, and you should be, right, these ones to be a little bit more focused on outside of those big three, choose the ones that make sense. And how can I get more out of the time that I spend with my vertical and my horizontal pushing? And then always checking back into, again, like, what's going on with, how am I feeling? Like, if you've got some pain, if you've got some discomfort somewhere, man, that's a clue.
Yeah.
You need to pay attention to that. Don't ignore it. Don't just say, oh, I'll just find something to work around, and choose something that feels good, right? A feeling good is important, but choose something that makes sense. It's going to help you feel better.
Yeah.
Like, not just feel good. So all that said, like, building that bigger, stronger back is a lot more than I think people give it, give thought to, and hopefully they can take away a few things from this and they get after it. If you have questions, you can always reach out to us too. By the way, this is a two-way conversation. I don't know if I think we try to encourage that in all the beginning and the end of any podcast, but hey, if you're doing stuff and you have questions, send us a video. Hit us on Instagram, send us a video, and we'll let's have a chat about it. We can help you out.